Hi everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie McCarthy. I'm the art collection manager here at Griffith University Art Museum. I'm not Angela Goddard, as you would have realised by now. Angela sends her apologies, but she's on some very overdue leave at the moment. So, but she wishes you very well. I got a text message just before from her. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Yugara and Turrbal peoples and their continuing connection to land, and as custodians of stories and culture. I pay my respect to the elders, past and present, and reflect that we are here on Aboriginal land, where generations have been learning, teaching, and making for millennia. We are delighted to bring you another instalment of the Making of series in partnership with Outer Space. At Guam, we really believe in sharing resources and knowledge and helping to foster collaboration throughout the community. It's good for the sector and it's good for audiences. Tonight we're thrilled to be hosting much loved local legend Megan Cope and to introduce her another legend, Georgia.
Thank you, Carrie. I'll move this up, but I'll remind me to move it back down. Hi everyone, my name's Georgia. I'm the director at Outer Space, if I haven't met you before. Thank you so much for being here this evening for the second instalment of our Making of series this year, Making of Megan Cope. These sessions are designed to invite in arts professionals and artists to learn a bit more about their early career aspirations and the opportunities that really made a difference to become the amazing people that they are today. Tonight we are incredibly fortunate to hear from leading artist and community icon, Megan Cope. Megan is a Quandamooka artist from Minjerribah, North Stradbroke Island, whose site-specific sculptural installations and public art practice and paintings investigate issues relating to colonial histories, the environment, and mapping practices. Megan has exhibited extensively across Australia and overseas, with major recent institutional exhibits at the Busan Biennial and Sharjah Biennale. Tonight we get to hear about some of the early learnings from Megan, some amazing old days photographs from the blog, which is very exciting, and all the amazing opportunities that have led to her outstanding artistic career. Please join me in welcoming Megan.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Carrie. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Outer Space. I just pay my respects also Yagara Turrbal peoples, as a Quandamooka woman. I acknowledge that my ancestors are connected to the ancestors of this land, our sovereignty never ceded, and because of my great granny and granddad, I'm here today because of their hard work and their vision for our people. I'm going to share the making of me. I think I've been making for about, feels like 20 years, but some of the things that made me are my country. So we're looking at Quandamooka country, Minjerribah, Mogampan. It's like an archipelago. I hope you've all been there. It's a bit biased, it is, but I do think it's the most beautiful place on earth. And very grateful for our old people. I'm very inspired by our country and all the stories of our survival, and that's really a major part in making who I am. Another person is my dad, Wayne. So my mum is not Indigenous, my father is, and through my father I belong to the Island and Martin families on Stradbroke Island. There's many families also connected, but that's my main lines through my granny and granddad. And this connection really has shaped my worldview. We don't really talk about this very often, but it's also like the confrontation of whiteness and the challenge of my whiteness kind of also connects to my blackness. And as an artist, I'm really interested in grappling with the complexities within that. within identity. But the reality is, when I was born, you know, my mother wanted to give me up, and she didn't take well to motherhood. So actually my father stepped in and he raised me. So I guess it's sort of why also everything is Quandamooka for me. I think it would be different if my mother had a bigger part of my life, but she didn't. So I think, you know, I think it's really important to articulate that, because I know that contemporary Indigenous art is a big thing. It's a major kind of player in the art world in Australia and certainly internationally. And just to, you know, I think it's really important that I just kind of explain how and why I got here. And that, I guess that's what makes it authentic. But yeah, as we discussed before, like I was born like just over there in the Mater Hospital, and went to art school later on. I mean, when I finished art school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Before I went to art school, I thought I'd be a good Aborigine and paint boomerangs, and I worked in a boomerang factory on the Gold Coast, and I learnt to do like tourist art, and you know, I thought that's what, you know, we're supposed to do as Aboriginal people when I was a teenager. Yeah, we grew up pretty rough and low socioeconomic, all those sorts of conditions were my childhood. So there weren't really that many opportunities available to me. We were very much like working class was wealthy. So yeah, after I got done over a few times with tourist art, I was telling my nana about it, and she said to me, oh, like, you know, you don't have to paint dots to be Aboriginal, Megan, you know. If you like art, why don't you go and study it like normal people? And it was kind of like the most amazing advice. And so I went to art school. I went to Kaya. Vernon Aki was my lecturer, Jennifer Hurd, Laurie Nielsen, and like changed my life. It was so incredible. But it was also very confronting. Because, you know, I was challenged by my whiteness. And this course, like, whilst the content was very familiar, and it was a very supportive black environment, I was afraid of, I don't know, I guess, I was afraid of the reception that people would have if I had a strong kind of, what do you call it, like conceptual or theoretical framework in my practice. And despite all of those support systems around me, I struggled. I actually left and I went to the Korea Institute of Education in Victoria, which was, you know, Indigenous education, but within a mainstream course. And so I did that, and I kind of have no regrets, because in that space, like, I was able to like learn about art history and the canon and all of these sorts of things. Later on, in hindsight, look back and like, I think that Kaya has changed a bit now. Like back then, it was very much, we were down the bottom and mainstream was over here, and there wasn't that much interacting. But I believe that it's very different now, and certainly we hear that from students today. So, but you know, I was like 19, very young, and you know, it was a different time. So after I finished uni, I just kind of was living on the Gold Coast. It was a bit of a void of art and culture, and I decided that I would just, I met someone at an art show. It was underwhelming, and we were both kind of complaining about how underwhelming it was, and we decided that we would start a project together, and we called it Tiny Gold. And this is us. This is me, Mariam Arcelia, and we formed this little artist-run initiative. Ran for 3 years on the Gold Coast, and we had this little annual exhibition called Tales from the Cold Ghost, and this was really cool. We used to make our own flyers. We used to make little dioramas. And really we did this because there just wasn't really anything around, so we just thought we'd just make it, and we'd invite other artists to come in, and we had this idea of like colonizing the Gold Coast with culture and like creating access for people to engage with art. And we first went to a little a disused shop, and we went in there and we wrote proposals, and we would give them to them. We said, we'll launch your project, we'll have this exhibition, we'll give you an audience. We didn't have any experience, but we just ran with it, and it was such an enormous success. I think we had like 600 people come to our opening, our first one, and then we ran it. The second year we found this lady we really liked. We thought, we can't go into a little shop now, we need a big space, something more like this space. And we found a lady who had a warehouse that was just storing buses and boats in it, and it was quite incredible. She was like, I've actually always wanted a gallery, and she converted the warehouse into a gallery, and then that place became 19 Karen, and I believe it still runs today. That was our second and third shows there. So, the first 5 years of my practice, I wasn't really making, I was just doing projects and serving artists, and just, I don't know, I had a lot of energy. It was before we used words like ADHD. We just did stuff, like we were just turbo. And I don't know, it was really interesting. It was a really good time. After all of that, I was invited I moved to Brisbane from the Gold Coast around 2009, and I came back here. I came back to Kaya, tutoring and just getting back in touch with everyone up here. And I also got asked to do this project, I was asked to be the creative director of the Bari Festival. And the Bari Festival was the Brisbane Artist Run Initiative Festival. So I directed that, and back then we had so many artist run spaces, like so many. We had more than Melbourne. So yeah, pretty kind of incredible backwater. That's how people down south would refer to us. So yeah, we made a little map, and it's kind of, a couple of little things that I used to do. What that did was create a really kind of incredible network of relationships that didn't exist with social media and weren't formed on social media, but rather just through shared labour and values and ideas. It's really, really cool. Eventually, I decided that, maybe I do want to do art. And so the penny dropped. Like, I guess I'd been having a lot of conversations, and I thought about this sort of mapping practice. Because, as an artist, and when you go to uni, you're sort of focused on the things that you want to say in your work, the politics of your work, the aesthetics of your practice, and all of those sorts of things. And for me, I really wanted to I guess I didn't really want to talk about myself. I wanted to talk about the larger political, social, cultural landscape, and for me it made sense to engage with maps and decolonize them, or at least kind of somehow embed the worldview that I had been sort of grown up with into a document or something that could share that worldview. And so language was that natural kind of intersection, but I also wanted to bring in kind of the essence of deep time and memory that our peoples and our culture possess, that is very unique, you know, when we compare it to European history or you know, other histories. So I thought, well, I will look to the future and generate a 5 metre sea level rise, and that kind of bridges this memory of when the sea rose 6,000 years ago. We have songs and stories about that time. Instead of making works that are just about that, I wanted to kind of bring it into a space where then we are all kind of confronted with the responsibility to country and caring for country, and all of those sorts of things, because we all live here now, and the rules are that, you know, we have one job, and that's to look after the land, and when we do that, then that gauges our health of society. Sorry, I don't know what that is, but wolf security. Yeah, so, you know, that's kind of what really underpinned the motivation to do the mapping works, and I still do them now. But there's a lot of, you know, ways and strategies to talk about colonialism, and I realised early on that maybe painting is limited, you know, or like one thing is limited, or maybe you could do installations or other interactions. So, but at all times it's about storytelling. So this is a work I made, Governor Arthur's proclamation, and Julie Goff is a really incredible artist, and she's worked a lot with this piece. It was kind of the first declaration of martial law in our history, specific to Tasmania, but this assertion of martial law and police violence has continued ever since. I just was doing a bit of wordplay there. Here's some earlier works as well, exploring mapping and other things, but you know, the reason I wanted to make these works was to talk about how Britain became the most wealthy empire in 1823 in the whole entire world, and that was from the gold extracted from Walwarang and Jajawarang countries. And so these works are kind of maps of those countries, but they're geological, and they're stained with tea and rum and the currencies that our people were paid, you know, in exchange for the labour in the goldfields. Think at all times I kind of want to continue to make these parallels between who benefits from this extraction and exploitation of country. I'm always asking myself, why did we grow up in poverty, and so many other people who have not been here as long as us don't have that issue. Here are some more map works. Early 2014, I moved down to Victoria, Melbourne, Naarm, Wurundjeri country, and continued my practice down there, and got involved in the community down there as well. Actually took a job at Footscray Community Arts Centre in 2015. So I think back in these times, I was quite, I would do 1 year of art practice, and then 1 year of community practice or curating or stuff like that. I don't know, I knew I wanted to be an artist, but being an artist is kind of lonely and isolating, actually, and I'm not that person, but I also am. I also enjoy the time out. So I think, back in those days, I was like figuring that stuff out. And, also when you're younger, it's sort of like, you're trying to figure out what's going on in the world. Is it this or is it that? I think now at 42, I'm like, it's all of it. That's what's beautiful and comes with aging. Another thing that made me who I am is proppaNOW, I reckon. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. Look, I was invited into the collective in 2011, shortly after, actually I was the director of the Bari Festival, and I invited proppaNOW to be a part of a program. And it was really interesting because I wasn't thinking about things. I wasn't really interested in all of the REs and all of those little things. I was like really thinking big picture all the time, and I was like, yeah, proppaNOW's self-made, artist run. Like, yes, they're a part of it. What do you mean? Like, why do we have to question this? Or let's not overthink it. It just is what it is. And it was really beautiful because feedback at the time was like, thanks for inviting us. proppaNOW felt excluded from everything, like back in those days. And it's true. Like, I think also, like, it was really challenging. The doors that we walk through today and that young people walk through today were closed. Even when I started in proppaNOW in 2011, there was a lot of resistance for the conversations that we wanted to have. There were no acknowledgements of country. There was a hostility. So, I really loved being invited into that collective because it was this place, a safe place for my rage, and it was a very loving place for us to laugh about how shit everything was, and that's really, really important. But then also not dwell in that, like be productive and go, well, what do we do about this? Let's have a show, let's talk about this, let's critique things. proppaNOW has really grown in the last couple of years, which is really, really exciting, and that has happened after we had our first institutional exhibition. Thankfully, UQ Art Museum, and thanks to Peter Rake, I think, it was, I think because Peter left and worked in Canada for a long time and came back, she valued us. She wasn't afraid of us. And she also thought, this is overdue. proppaNOW needs to have a institutional recognition. And so we hadn't had a show for 5 years, and then we had a current affair, and it was beautiful. Like Vera was saying, we're back to thinking proppaNOW, and it's really interesting. It's like every member has their own way. And proppaNOW is very unique. Like, we really are like family, or at least it's been like that for the past 20 years. And at no point, it's like some people might say things that you don't agree with, but it's like family, where you just go, okay, Dad, okay, Mum, whatever. Like, you still love them, right? That's what I think is so powerful about proppaNOW, and very different to artist-run spaces and other collectives and other projects. Like, it's like ride or die. It's, it's really powerful. And it's a lot of that foundational strength, I think, is from, Uncle Laurie and Jennifer's vision, and kind of, embodying what they created here at Kaya. That exhibition led us to receiving an award, the Jane Lombard Prize for Art and Social Justice in New York. It's kind of fascinating that we got recognition in New York City, where, like, you know, artists, when you want to be an artist, you go to New York. It was so cool. So we had this exhibition at the New School, and we called it There Goes the Neighbourhood. This is us in Tony's studio making our first box set, our print project. And, you know, a lot of this kind of is because of the relationship that we have with Tarntanya and that project that they also did here, and the things that we learnt and shared as collective and as artists, like how do we work together, how do we make our own money, how do we survive when institutions are beholden to policies and biases and funding and things like that. Like, we can't let these things stop us from having a voice and doing the things that we want to do. And so, yeah, making prints and accessible, affordable artworks that bring everybody back in as well. You know, I think that it's really, really important to continue that practice. Like, I don't think that success in art is this kind of, you know, ivory tower or New York City. You know, I think that it's really, really important to maintain the continuum and care and connection with everybody around you, because at the end of the day, the greatest supporter of the arts are artists. This is our world, this is our space. So yeah, we were pretty proud of ourselves when we did that. And it's really important to note, Jennifer, like, actually, even if I go back here, so Uncle Laurie's missing here, so Vernon's holding him with his sculpture. So it's kind of impossible for us to get a photo together, like in 20 years. So that's why we always have something to represent the absent member. Yeah, and proppaNOW, it's special because, you know, especially when I was starting out, it was like I could really test ideas and I could be held and I'd be backed by intellectuals and artists who would completely understand the work. And, you know, that was really important because we wanted to challenge the status quo and things that were going on. This was really, really important. This is a work that I made for a current affair, and it's a critique on social media. It's a portrait of society in my view, and how the Murdoch press and Meta and these other people create this space that make us feel like we have autonomy. But I sort of like to question, actually, if we do in fact have autonomy on these platforms. And I sort of, yeah, see this like bait ball thing going on and a downward spiral into the target that's a mirror. Do a bit of public art. I realised I didn't put much public art in this presentation tonight, but this was a work that I did in Naarm, and I was like really busy at the time, and I didn't really want this project. And I think that it's an interesting project because I think in the year 2015 a lot of things changed, and up until this point, you know, you're used to being rejected for being bold, and you know, so therefore, like, that's where proppaNOW has its value, because we can be bold in there. As a strategy, from what I learned, I thought I'd just make this thing so big that they would just never commission it. And I'd have language on it and like really reclaim this space, and they loved it. And I could not believe it. So we went ahead. And this was on the Australian Catholic University building for like it was commissioned for 5 years. It was on there for ages. I think they've only just taken it down. It looked really shit at the end because it was only supposed to last 5 years. But, you know, in addition to the mapping, I've been interested in place name projections and place names because they're a marker of what is there, who, you know, language signifies whose place it is. And I guess, you know, there were some things I learnt with the topographical practice, that there's a critical distance where some people can step away from that view, or maybe they're like, oh yeah, that's nice, like that was the name once upon a time. And so, you know, I felt like projecting place names onto, you know, rubble at a building site was also a way to kind of say, no, it's all the time. It's now, it's all the time. It's everywhere, all the time. So yeah, these are like really pretty early works, I feel like. It's a bit later. Minjerribah, Brown Lake at home. In 2016, I was invited to go and have an exhibition in Jerusalem, in Palestine. And this was a really... I'll never forget this, you know, the reality there. I mean, I use the military maps to talk about like occupation and other things here, but they are abstract to a degree, until, when you're in places like Palestine, they're not abstract. And I remember I took my shells, my little concrete shells, was going to make a midden there, as an act of solidarity, of how like their cultural sites and their entire existence is being erased from the landscape. And it was really interesting. Some brothers took us out to Bethlehem, and in Bethlehem they were showing me there's this like one last Palestinian house, and how the colonialism works is kind of exactly how it worked here. Like roads were built on our walking tracks. So roads are built over there, like highways though, like turbo, like intense highways. And then houses are removed, villages removed, people removed. There was this one last house, and an artist was living in there, like as a kind of the last frontier almost thing. And we dug up the earth there, but you could see all of these old terraces, the olive groves. It was a really incredible experience. So I brought the earth back here and sifted it because I need to make it sand. It's very different earth. And what was really remarkable while I was doing this was like every Palestinian person would pick up the earth and smell it, and they knew exactly that it was from Bethlehem. It was so amazing. I'd never seen that before. It was very incredible exhibition. So we're just going to talk about like also then the middens, and then how like I've sort of been obsessed with them for the past 10 years, and that they've really informed my practice. But, you know, like every work kind of gives you the template for the next work, I think. You know, if you look at your practice in that way, where it's a continuum and every failure is a opportunity for something else, like I think that that's a really positive way to approach practice. I was researching middens because I wanted to talk about architecture, and I wanted to talk about continuum, and I wanted to like give value to things that have been called a rubbish dump, for instance. You know, like so much of our culture is like historically been referred to in that way. And so, you know, when you grow up Aboriginal, you're just like, what are you talking about? You don't know anything about us. Like, our life is not like this, you know. It's hard, and we have poverty, we have a lot of problems, but we also have like so much incredible history and things that can make you feel so strong even if you have nothing materially. So yeah, I really wanted to look at the middens and challenge perhaps our perception and reimagining the landscape through being able to see them. And I like to share this photograph because this is this is an image of a midden, and this is how large they were once upon a time before they were mined to produce cement. This midden wasn't actually extracted for cement production because it's a Yugari midden, it's a pipi midden on the back beach, but it was affected by mining, sand mining, and the excavation of sand and the holes did over time then flatten this out, and it no longer has a grandiose appearance in the landscape. This was my first attempt at talking about middens, and this was the work that actually travelled to Palestine, the Little Reformation Part 2, and that comprised of discussion really about extraction and culture replacing culture, and how sort of institutional colonial mythologies can, if they're said long enough, people will believe them. And yeah, so this work is the concrete shells embedded in the black mineral sands ilmenite, but it was also the beer cans and in the silica sand. And I wanted to do that because the site of at Mooloolaba, where the Surf Lifesaving Club is at Point Lookout, is built on a midden, and so it is exactly that thing of one culture replacing another, and a set of priorities and certain vitriol that persists, and then kind of looking at how our people are the ones who are left with that stain, even though no one even goes drinking there in the community. I wanted to just sort of remind people where alcohol came and from, and so I put the Union Jack in the beer cans, and put it in the white sand. The next iteration was for the National in Sydney, and I wanted to sort of pay respects to Double Gully and the midden that was there where the Sydney Opera House is. So back in 2017, I wanted to sort of try and continue to upscale, because I had the knowledge of that scale in my mind, and when you go on country and you go to middens, they're often now just shell scatters, and we don't know that they're remnants, and that they once were monuments in a way. So this was my first attempt of that, with a budget that wasn't the best, but I got to do this, and now this lives at Goma, thankfully, this work. This is kind of back and forth a little, but when I first started talking about, the shells being mined to use to make cement, this was the first kind of formal resolution that I had, which was a concrete foundation with the oyster rising up. But I learnt from the first few exhibitions that everyone was like, what's a midden? So I had to kind of, I realised to tell this story I had to go kind of back and be more explicit with the form for it to make sense in a long view. So this is the same sculpture but two views. And yeah, I've continued with the mapping practice, which is really nice. This work is about the Black Napoleon. Now it's really kind of magnificent, you get beautiful invitations to go to places, and this work was created after being invited to go to Paris, for the first time back in, 2018 or something. And we were looking at the Busan voyages, and we were looking at this, the reality that the French were also on their way here. And they were here before the British, actually. They weren't here before the Moccasins or Chinese, but, it was that time. The Enlightenment, or the Great Entitlement, perhaps. Age of Entitlement is more appropriate. Anyway, after being in Paris and looking at Napoleon and all of that, I was just I just want to talk about the Black Napoleon. And it was so interesting. Again, it was that thing of the lady asked me, the curator, she was like, what? The black who? And I was like, yeah, we have Black Napoleon from Stradbroke. And she was like, is there evidence of this? I was like, yeah. I mean, I actually wasn't sure. Because it was an oral history, it was a story. But thankfully there's archives. And we go to the archives and we pick it out and we go, here you go, is this good enough? There were lots of articles. But again, it's really fascinating to me, place names and history and the persistence of certain narratives and how maps and things kind of reinforce that. So we know it's St. Helena out there. We know it's also Nagoon. But the reason that island is called St. Helena is because Ulipi, a resistance fighter from our country, he stole an axe. He was leading a lot of battles with the Redcoats from the 40th Regiment. And, the police were very impressed. There's a lot of evidence, actually. So it turns out. And he stole an axe from the Redcoats, and they captured him and decided they'd teach him a lesson and incarcerate him. Classic, incarceration. Will teach him a lesson, and they took him to Nagoon. And then his incarceration lasted about 3 days, or as long as it took him to cut a canoe off a tree and go home. They reckon it was about 3 days. But if you don't know that story, you think about St. Helena and the Black Napoleon, and then there's its colonial, the colonial, the white side, the white story that kind of fills in the gaps, right? So I think it's art's really important, and our art's really important for those reasons. Just always going back to country, I suppose. Same thing all the time, but some things don't change. And I really enjoy painting and printmaking and new ways of saying the same thing, I suppose. But not always. Sometimes I do weird things like this big sculpture. But, listening to country, finding ways to kind of explain, maybe not explain, but share the sentience of nature and the value that we place in our kin. In this instance, we're looking at Curlew, and the relationship that we have with Curlew as a messenger for the underworld. And I made this work for the Adelaide Biennial, and the theme was monster theatres, and it was really dark. 2019 was really hard, and there was those catastrophic fires, and there was something going on before COVID. It didn't feel great. We were all wearing masks with the smoke inhalation. And so, I made this work like Death Song to kind of, I guess, be upfront about what's really going on. How much more can destruction can we take? And how do we value nature in a different way? We look at the Curlew as a messenger of and possessing knowledge that we don't have. Then is that a way that we can perhaps adjust our position? away from this apex predator kind of vibe that comes with white supremacy and colonialism. I think in 2022, after all that darkness, I was like, I just want to go home, and taking all the learnings and all the things about like saying the same thing for like 10 years, and feeling like the victories are great, but they're not enough. And then what is my cultural responsibility? What is art? Like, just rethinking everything. And I decided I wanted to move out of the institution because I sort of lost faith. I was very tired and I felt like I was just a shell. I just like given so much for so long. And that's the funny thing too, right? And this goes back to the thing about why it's really important to maintain community and maintain artist-run stuff and just do stuff just for the sake of it, not for the, not always for the museum. I was thinking a lot about the museum, like what does the museum do? Historically, the museum holds like objects of our ancestors that were stolen through violence and really horrific events, and we don't have access to those anymore, so that there's a lot of power and control that's maintained through that disconnection. So I was really thinking about those sorts of things, and I thought I just wanted to go home and go back to my family in a lot of ways and look at what the things that kept us alive and the things that like the oysters, for instance, Kiningara, and our relationship to those, and like really things that I didn't think were that important but are so important in the end. Alright, let's really quickly go through this. Super quick. How's everyone? Does everyone want a drink? A break? Okay, alright, just really quickly go through this. So look, oysters are very important. And yeah, they're 97% extinct, and it's really, really terrifying. If you know anything about the ocean, the oysters are the working class of the ocean, and they do everything for everyone, like all species. So look at the same space here. We've got oyster reefs. This is even, the image on the left is actually after the removal. So once they mined our middens, they then took the shells off the live reefs and burnt those as well. And our people were very much a part of this industry and process. After this, of course, the Moreton Bay Oyster Company came along, and all of the oysters that we eat today are cultivated for our human consumption. And so that's why there's not very much. But that's how capitalism works. It's like you need to be able to commodify it and reduce it to a point where it can be controlled. And then a price can be put on it for the marketplace. So this work is about looking at all of that and seeing if art can change that, and actually do something about it, not just talk about it. So we made these oyster poles. They're a little bit of an invention, but it's looking at, I guess, what's been taken, which is the shell form, the calcium carbonate, from the substrate of the ocean. It's been taken for cement production, and like seeing if we can return it, because basically oysters have a code in their DNA, and when they're born, they float around and they're like searching for their ancestors, and they're searching for that shell to settle on. Because once they settle, that's it, they stay there for life. A bit like blackfellas as well. Like, where we come from is where we come from, and that doesn't change. So trying to make some land art. Then to talk about it in the institution, I made these. Took it to Korea. beautiful synergy with Korean culture and oyster growing as well, and it being matriarchal work, much like our grannies. And this is sort of, you get to see how it works. So that's the blanks, and that's how it becomes habitat. So the oysters just move in, and it creates really safe space for them to flourish. And we plant them waist height, so it maximises food capture and also tidal movement in the water column, so they get to clean. So the problem is, every time it rains, all the toxic mud leads to mass die-offs when they're on the seafloor. So this creates, maximises their growth and opportunity to grow. Yeah, I might just wrap it up there. That's. I was going to go into Sydney Opera House, but I think you probably all saw that. So, yeah. And then, from there, it's gone to Sharjah, which is really remarkable too. Like, things that you make really about home and country then can actually have connections in other places too. That's what's really remarkable. This work is in a 90 million year old seabed in the United Arab Emirates in Sharjah. It's a very sacred site actually to the peoples there. It's a burial site as well. There are ancestors there that are about 7,000 years old, pre-Islam in fact, and they love this. It's like the old ancient reef with the future reef proposition. We took the midden there, part of the midden, and again, like a connection. The people there in the old souks make their architecture with coral. So it's very beautiful conversation happening architecturally. And then finally, most recently, I suppose, in Hawai'i, this is overlooking Pearl Harbor, Pula'au, and if you look really closely, it's kind of hard to see, but maybe on the right hand side you see these little forms sticking up. They're all American military warships, and it's a dumping ground. Because of that, the oysters have become extinct. So we made these poles, and we're going to plant them eventually one day there.